You're listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickarse.com/episode 38.
Welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Hello, listeners. Podcasting is an awesome way for me to share my passion with the world and provide you with inspirational interviews. The only downside with podcasting is that it's one-way communication. My guest and I talking and you listening. Now is the time for me to start building a kick-ass tribe with people like you. People who listen to my podcast, people who hear where I'm coming from, people who want to improve themselves and want to kick ass in life. Let's start building a relationship. To get the ball rolling, I need you right now to head to my website, borntokickarse.com, and sign up for my free newsletter. Once again, that's borntokickarse.com. Once you've signed up, I'll be able to find out from you what you want to improve in your own life, whether it's creating your own website or launching a podcast, or you want to improve your health, or you want to set and achieve big goals, or whatever it may be. Sign up now. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Nickademus Hollon is one of a handful of people who have ever completed the mythical Barkley Marathons, a race where it's common for there to be 0 finishers. In 2013, Nick finished in 57 hours, 39 minutes and 24 seconds. The Barkley Marathons has been designed specifically for people to fail. There's 60,000 feet of elevation change, equivalent to ascending and descending Mount Everest twice, a 60-hour cutoff. There's no up-to-date website and the application process is shrouded in mystery. The entry fee for first-time entrants is $1.60 and you need to bring a car license plate from your home state. If you're one of the lucky 40 people to be accepted each year, you're given a letter of condolence. Nick shares some hellish insight into the race that eats its young. Enjoy the interview. Nickademus Hollon, welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt. I'm honored to be on here.
How's the legs feeling? Last weekend you did the Twin Peaks Ultra. Was that a 50-miler?
Yeah, so it was a 53-mile race to be exact here in Southern California, and it was just I was out in Japan earlier in September, and that race got shortened from 170K to 47K about 30 minutes before the start of the race. And so that kind of left, that was going to be my last ultra race of the year and end my season with that for ultras. But I didn't want to end on, I only got to run a 47K. So kind of threw this 53-miler in last minute with my fiance, and we both decided to run it. And ended up going pretty well, and it was a first place and a course record for me, which was nice. And the downhills of that thing though were wicked, so probably I'm trying to convert meters in my head. It was somewhere around 5,000 meters for about an 85K distance, so it was pretty substantial amount of up and down. The quads are still feeling pretty thrashed.
Just the race that you mentioned in Japan, was that the UTMF?
Yes,
Ultra Trail Mount Fuji?
Ultra Trail Mount Fuji, which was really fun to go out there and visit Japan. Absolutely beautiful region, but September, currently when they run the race, I was told by all the locals that's typically typhoon season. So the rain there, it was a ton of rain, but not abnormal apparently for that time of year.
That would have been devastating. Like, when did you find out they'd shortened it?
About 30 minutes before the start. So everyone's just sitting there with their packs ready and everything, and we're all ready to go. And I know for a fact, I might not stand a chance against, Xavier Thenard or Dylan Bowman or those guys in a 47K race, but I know for a fact, like, I can personally, my talent is throwing down in a 100-mile race when things get tough. So the fact that it was shortened to like a little less than a 50K, I was like, whoa, I got to sprint.
Yeah.
Which completely, of course, with 30 minutes to go, changed everybody's race strategy.
Yeah, that would have been full on. Just trying to reconfigure, your approach to fueling and your gear and stuff like that.
What happened basically was that I had my plan and everything like that, but then they said, okay, now it's a 47K race, and the race took off probably at 5 40-minute miles. I'm not sure what that converts to in kilometers per minute, but took off pretty fast. So keeping up with the front pack was really tough. And just to try and get places, I completely threw my nutrition and hydration plan out of the window. So, whatever it was, 3 hours into the event came around, and I had, like a total noob doing a marathon for the first time, just completely blew up. And it was like, I got shook up by the shortening of the distance.
It would have been a good place to sort of do it anyway in Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you've got a really impressive resume. You've done you've done Badwater a couple times. You've won the Fat Dog 120 miler in Canada. You've got a whole heap of other wins and podiums, and you're still pretty young, aren't you?
Yeah, 26 years old and been doing ultras. I did my first 100 when I was 18 years old. So I'm young, but I have the resume of most people in their 40s or late 40s almost. So
how did you get into running? Were you like always a runner or into sports, in your younger years growing up?
Yeah, growing up, kind of. My mom back in her day used to do track and field and stuff like that, used to be in hurdles, used to kind of do the same. Oh, I'm going to go see if I can just climb up this mountain on my own today. So she was kind of a free spirit like that. And so genetically, I think I picked up a little bit of that maybe. My dad's side, not a whole ton. So that's about it for genetics. Other than that, it's just predisposed to diabetes and heart conditions like most people. But then growing up early on, my mom did her first marathon after my parents got divorced at around, I was probably 12 years old at the time when I watched her complete her first marathon. And after watching that, I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like my mom. She looks so strong and just like on top of the world after doing it. And I applied to the marathon folks, and at age 14 at the time, they were like, oh no, you're too young. You can't come. And so then I applied next year, writing a more convincing letter saying, oh, it's been my life dream. I've always wanted to do this. And I guess they took pity on me or something, and they let me in at age 15. So that was when I did my first marathon. And then kind of long story short, got into ultras as a result of a close friend of mine who was diagnosed with cancer in high school. And I did a 100-mile run around a high school track to fundraise money for him at the time. And he's now well and a survivor and everything. But that was kind of my first endeavor into ultras, was a 100-mile run around a track as sort of a media stunt to raise money for a friend.
The reason one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, there is an ultra called the Barkley Marathons.
Yeah.
And this has been going for, when did it kick off? Was it sort of mid-80s, 85, 86?
Yeah, so it was about, 1986 was the first year. So it's been around, I'm not going to do the math correctly there, but it's been around for over 25 plus years. So
a lot of people listening to this podcast, I'm guessing runners mainly, possibly ultra runners. There's heaps of ultra marathons out there. With the Barkley, absolutely. This particular ultra it sort of lies in the realm of, it's like a mythical ultra in terms of all the stuff that's sort of wrapped around it. Can you maybe sort of shed some light to listeners and sort of tell us about this particular, or what makes the Barkley Marathons unique?
So there's a lot of components that make it unique. First of all, so it's the Barkley Marathon, so it's not particularly, Laz doesn't say too many places that it is in fact a 100-mile distance or anything. People have gone back and, gone on Google Earth and tried to retrace some of the some of what they think the route was idealistically, and it's aimed to be anywhere between 120 to 140 miles, depending on how much you screw up your navigation. And so the distance is variable. It's not 100 miles. It's all pretty much off trail, and so it has a lot of orienteering aspect to it. So, but it's not GPS orienteering. You're forced to use a map and compass, and the map is the map from the Frozen Head State Park that you can only order from there. I think you can get it offline these days, but other than that, you were only able to pick it up in that state park specifically when you got to Tennessee. And so, it's off trail navigation. You got to go out in the forest and find these books that he's hidden under trees, and then there's a whole different bunch of aspects to it. But the main part that really throws off a lot of ultra runners is the fact of the matter that it is in fact probably 33% your ability to deal with navigation and sleep deprivation, 33% your actual physical ability to climb and deal with the ascents and descents. In this race, you're dealing with dozens and dozens of 1,000-foot climbs and 1,000-foot descents, one after the other, and it adds up to about what would be like 20,000, a little bit beyond 20,000 meters of climbing over the entire distance.
It's equivalent to like climbing Everest and descending Everest twice.
Yeah, exactly. It's unparalleled in its distance. There's no race that really comes close to it in terms of elevation gain per mile than Barkley. So it's about double Hard Rock or anything that comes close to it.
So just to give some, I guess, context to listeners, it almost seems as though this race was designed for people to fail. Would that be right?
Yeah. So one of the parts, I would say, one of the components of Barkley that makes it the most mythical in my mind is and this is kind of how I came to be so fascinated with it. And I'll just back up there a little bit, was, finishing my first 100-miler. I was like, whoa, this is the most difficult thing the human body can do. I'm so on top of the world, which was kind of that feeling that led me to the marathon in the first place. And then being kind of addicted to that feeling, I was like, oh, wow, there's something harder. There's this thing called the Badwater. I'm going to go try that. And then lo and behold, I finished Badwater. And then for a while there, it was like climbing to the top of sand dunes where you look in the distance and there's only higher sand dunes beyond you. So it was like, all right, well, what's the next most difficult? And so I started looking at finishing rates, and that led me to some pretty weird races where, the finishing rates were getting lower and lower. So one of the biggest mythical parts with Barkley is when we look over the statistics since 1986, the race's first year, there's a total of 14 of us, some who have finished twice, one guy who's finished twice, one guy who's finished 3 times, but there's 14 of us total in the world of everyone who's ever tried this event that have finished 5 full loops of it. So statistically speaking, it has less than, I think, a 1% finish rate, which is very unparalleled in any modern ultra. So a lot of people look to that and are like, what's so difficult? What's out there that's so difficult? Why can't people do this? Professionals who've whooped on me at races like the Hurt 100, Gary Robbins has been there and, had a tough time out there this year on the 5th loop. And there's been some phenomenal runners who have stepped up to the plate at Barkley and gotten knocked down by its sort of might and mystery.
On the website, the Barkley Marathons website, to get into Barkley, it says that you need to write an essay on why you should be allowed to run the Barkley. Did you write one? Was that something that you did when you?
Yeah. The whole entry process to Barkley is pretty secret. It's pretty guarded. But if you can find the correct person to email and all of that, and you find the correct way to email it and everything like that, then yes, you are required to. That's sort of the application process, is a short essay of why I should be allowed to run the Barkley Marathons. And I forget what I put on my first one exactly, but it was something like, I've done the hardest races in the world, and I'm going to come and complete your race. And I was, I was 20. I think it was somewhere on, yeah, I couldn't go have a beer yet in the US. I was 20 years old, the first time that I showed up at Barkley. But the very first time, which was 2011, I was let into the race 2 weeks before the start of it, and I was called the what Laz dubs each year. It's called the sacrificial virgin, which is the person he deems least likely to even make it through one loop. And that year, 2011, I made it through 3 loops. So I like to say I'm one of the more successful sacrificial virgins.
I also read that if you're accepted, you're actually given the opportunity to back out with honor.
Yes, yeah. So you can back out at any time. There's a pretty massive wait list these days. I've watched it over the last couple of years. It used to only go back like 10 or 15 people, but if you're like 30th or 50th on that wait list, you might have a chance of getting in the race. There's quite a few people who back out of this race as the days and all that count down.
So are you able to spill the beans on how you actually get in? Like, in addition to your resume and stuff like that, do you just need to sort of start asking and
yeah, exactly. If you really want to get there, you'll find out how to get there. And that's unfortunately as detailed as I'm going to be with that. But yeah. It basically on a fundamental way has to stay that way in the context that Laz's permit's about for 35, 40 people at the state park. And so that's how many people are allowed to run it per year. And the issue, of course, it can't ever turn into something like UTMB or Tour of Giants or any big European race. It has to stay about 35 people because you think, okay, it's an off-trail race. And even 35 people, you come through on the third loop of Barkley and out in the middle of nowhere in the forest, all of a sudden, it looks like there's some semblance of a trail where 35 people have now gone through multiple times. So you can imagine what it would look like if you had 300 people running a 20-mile loop. It would be a full-on trail, 20 miles into the thing, and the environment just wouldn't. I don't think the environment would recover year to year.
Now, I was looking at the entry fee to get in. Basically for veterans, people who have failed at the Barkley before, the entry fee is a pair of gold-toed dress socks.
Oh man, yeah, yeah. That one changes each year. The veterans, man, when I did it, it was a pack of cigarettes was what you got to get him if you're a finisher. You got to go give him a pack of cigarettes. I think he's been trying to kick his smoking habit for a long time, but. Yeah, it's been a pack of cigarettes. I wasn't aware of the gold-toed sock one. I know in the past it's been a flannel T-shirt, and then traditionally, if you're a virgin, you have to bring him a license plate from your home state or from your home country.
All right. And is there like a good collection of license plates from?
Yeah,
all around the
that's
place?
Probably one of the cooler spectacles at the Frozen Head State Park campground before the race is you're stepping up to the mythical yellow gate, which is of course the gate that you have to touch each time when you come around from a Barkley loop and verify that you in fact ran your loop. But as you're coming up to that, rattling in the wind is kind of this wall of lost souls almost. That's what I call it, and it's just this ominous rattling of thousands of people's license plates just kind of rattling there in the wind of 99.9% of those people got DNF'd at Barkley. So
and also the entry fee. How much is the entry fee to get in?
Because
yeah, I know a lot of the other big ultras, they're hundreds of dollars to get in, but with the Barkley, what's the entry fee for that one?
Barkley's right up there, man. It's a whole $1.60. So it's $1.60, which is probably makes it the cheapest race. I've had a lot of people offer, oh man, the friends and family, I'll sponsor you if you want to do Barkley again. It's like, oh thanks, I could use the $1.60. Yeah. But it's a $1.60, which it goes to pay Laz's. I forget what the joke he uses is. Goes to pay something hilarious, and then. The race mainly, though, from my understanding, is ran off of some anonymous donations and all of that. So,
is Gary Lazarus Cantrell the race director? Is he? And I'm sort of asking tongue in cheek. Is he a bit of a sadist? like designing this race with everything stacked against everyone, like the entry fee, the people don't know how to get in, the application process.
Right. I think it's all part of the head game with Barkley starts in the entry process alone. I'd say for a lot of people, and to sort of take all the traditional components of an ultra and to sort of throw them out the window and create what he's created is a really beautiful thing. Is he a sadist? Yeah, I mean, he likes seeing his fair share of people suffer and everything, but my sort of feeling of when I left the race, and joining the few people who were finishers of the event in 2013, when I finished the event, I left it with sort of the feeling of, here's this guy who kind of understands, one of the few people, race directors, who actually understands, where exactly is the limit of human potential, and here's this great arena to go see what it is. Because Barkley is, you have what is possible and what is impossible, and Barkley is like right on that line. It rides that ridge like exactly. And so something like, we look at like Western States, or we look at like Ultra Trail to Mont Blanc, and any of those which are, given weather conditions and stuff change each year, the courses are stagnant. So we see course records, of course, drop over time, and we see what might have been unfathomable 10 years ago. Someone hit like 2 hours under that these days because of, competition and everything. But the course itself doesn't evolve. Barkley, however, different to Western States and UTMB and all of the races, is sort of like a live amoeba. It morphs, and as we as athletes, we as a society, get better and better in our endurance, in our navigation, in our sleep deprivation, and we get better and we push that limit of human potential further and further. Barkley is the only event that I'm aware of that actually pushes back and says, well, all right, good job on getting that done. Well, now we're going to make it a little bit harder, and can you do it now? And so, to explain that a little bit better, every year that someone finishes Barkley, the race he'll make it a little bit harder. So he'll either change the position of a book to add another 300 or 400 foot hill. He'll get rid of a section that was on trail for a little bit and throw you off trail. He'll start it at 2 a.m. instead of 9 a.m. And so there's this, beginning with the application process, really, there's this whole element of the unknown, really. And for a lot of people, even beginning with the application process, that's really unnerving for the person who's maybe used to, okay, I'm doing 100 miles. I know even if I get the worst weather in the world and I'm having stomach cramps and I'm dying, I know this race is done at 100 miles. And really, you don't know that at Barkley. You don't know when it's going to start. You don't know when the application window is. You don't know when so many things that you would normally know in a race.
Now, with the actual start time of the race, I heard that it could start anywhere. Is it between midnight and 12 p.m. the next day? And you just don't know. You're just sort of waiting around.
Yeah, exactly. So it's already, if anyone's, done an ultra or a big race, or, has Christmas the next morning kind of syndrome, and you can't go to sleep that night because you're so excited or nervous for whatever it is the next morning. Barkley is that, but tenfold. So you're sitting there trying to sleep, but you're not sure if the conch. So he blows again. There's so many. Man, talking to you, I'm remembering all the subtleties of this race, and there's so many different kind of just strange things he does. And so to mark that the race is about to begin, he'll blow a conch shell, and so one of the type noises. And when you hear that, I remember hearing that my first year, and I was like, oh, is there a semi truck in camp? What the heck is going on? And then I was like, oh no, that's the conch. We're starting in an hour. And just kind of frantically getting my things together. And the race that year actually started, I think it was sometime around 2 a.m. And it's a scary thing to hear that conch. But yeah, certainly that's part of it though. Any time between 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. And that makes the sleep the previous night pretty difficult.
So you've towed the start line 4 times? was it?
3 times.
Three
Three
times.
times. So my first time was in 2011, and what's it called? I showed up with 2 weeks notice that I was in the event. So with like zero training under my belt, pretty much took like a crash course in orienteering from a friend. And I showed up just having printed like as many maps from like the Kinko's printing service place, and just had all the maps and USGS maps that I could of the region. And I studied those as much as I could on the flight over. But I was just, I was super scared and just like latching on whatever veteran would take me. And so that year, it was fear that kind of overtook me and sort of the unknown there. And that year I finished 3 loops in 2011. 2012 was a little bit different. I went there really, really cocky and like, I'm going to crush this race. This race beat me last year. Nothing makes me DNF. And so that was, of course, 2012, the year that the Barkley documentary was filmed that's on Netflix. And so if you watch the sort of beginning of that, what you'll see is you'll see a long-haired version of me. So that was me in college. And then I had to get out and get a job. So I had to cut the hair. Anyways, you'll see me just kind of start off, and I'm just blasting up the mountain because I'm full of like vinegar and just like wanting to rage that year, full of ego and everything. And I blow by the first book, I blow by the second book, and I'm just screwing up my navigation left and right. And I get defeated pretty much 1 book shy of making a 4th loop. So I want to say like on the second year, I pretty much got 4 loops minus 1 book. And that year I ended up dropping out really mainly because I was overconfident. And then I want to say the third and final year, so 2013, when I went back for the last time, I went back finally with, a balance between fear that I had experienced in 2011. So fear had kind of turned into, okay, now I respect this course. And then I had confidence, but I wasn't overconfident like I was in 2012. So it was really the marriage of those 2 years that I think that the balance of that essentially that gave me the ability and really the mindset to complete the race in 2013.
Just before we sort of delve a bit deeper into the 2013 race, you've mentioned books a few times. Can you maybe tell, because, like on other ultras, you've got checkpoints. Can you maybe shed some light on, the books or the book checkpoints to listeners?
Yeah. So kind of similar to if anyone, it comes from either an adventure racing or a Rogaine or an orienteering background. This is kind of something similar to where, you're navigating out to a point and then you either take a flag or you take something to mark that you've been to said weird location. And so, but what Laz has done instead is he's thrown, of course, a twist on top of that. And what he's done is he goes to, it's either like a 99-cent store or like a old romance novel store. And he'll go out and he'll pick these books with these really funny titles often. So it's, things like Love Among the Briars, or You'll Never Make It, or Don't Quit Now, or You're Weak and Dying. So all these books have like, really like terribly demotivating titles. And so typically it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt where, 12 of these books, 10 to 12 of these books, depending on the course, are hidden throughout Frozen Head State Park. And you start your loop with a bib number, and say I'm bib number 25. I arrive at the first book having followed the directions and navigated correctly. I then rip out page 25 of my book, navigate correctly to the next book, rip out page 25, and proceed to do that for all, let's say, 12 books of the loop. Then I show Laz my 12 pages. He verifies that number 25 has been ripped out of all 12 of those books. Then I touch the yellow gate. I can then go to my crew and do what I need to in terms of rest, whatever I need to change clothing-wise. Then I go back out on the next loop, and you get a new bib number. So I might be bib number 40 now, and I go collect page 40 from everything. And so same thing, just on repeat until you got all 5 loops in.
With the actual books, when you say they're hidden, are they how hidden are they? Are they still fairly accessible in terms of being able to see?
Pretty hidden. And they're pretty they're often pretty vague clues. So really having had that experience of, okay, I've done the race the year before, or hanging out with veterans whose word of mouth has been passed down from the years that, oh, the book at the bottom of Testicle Spectacle that's in the swamp behind the two logs underneath the rock. Like literally that's what's written down on the piece of paper, and you're sitting and you're staring at the bottom of, look at the map. There's nothing on the map that's going to say Testicle Spectacle Climb. It's a made up name for the hill that only exists among, what are called the barkers or the people that have done the race. And so, you're told, at the bottom of Testicle Spectacle, there's a swamp. And so, if it's been raining, the whole area looks like a swamp. And so, and then it's, two logs, and you're staring around and you're like, okay, well, that could be two logs. That could be two logs. That might be two logs. And then behind a rock, and you're like, okay, well, two logs and a rock. And you're like trying to put these like really vague clues together. And unless you have a pretty good handle on the terrain and for a fact you're in the right area, you can spend some time flipping over rocks and coming up with nothing for a while. And there's, in that particular mountain range, so the Brushy Mountain State Park, or the Brushy Mountains, where the race takes place, there's a lot of very similar terrain. So you can end up in a little valley or whatever that looks the exact same as the one that you're supposed to be in, and the exact same as the one over. So a lot of the ridges look the exact same. A lot of the mountains look the exact same. And so when you're in the thick of trees and everything like that, it's sometimes very hard to distinguish exactly where on the map you are.
With the navigation, or the navigation skills that you need to bring into this event, G'day guys, Matt here. This podcast is a labour of love, and all episodes are researched, scheduled, edited, created and promoted in my spare time. Typically, after an episode has been recorded, it can take another 3 hours of post-production activities to get the final cut. If I'm providing you with value and you wish to support my vision of sharing these inspirational stories to the world, you can do so at borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. Your support will help to maintain the monthly podcast running costs and enable me to outsource repetitive tasks so I can bring you even more kick-ass episodes. Once again, if you want to support me in producing this podcast, head over to borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. You can't miss it. And now back to the rest of the show. Are you allowed a GPS, or is it the old school compass and map type?
So it's all old school, which is kind of the fun part of it. It's so much of these days we got our technology and everything like that. I think if it was GPS, it'd be a lot easier. You just go around the first time, waypoint all the books, and then you just sprint between everything, basically going from waypoint to waypoint. But this is this is all map and compass, GPS, cell phones, all that are banned by your own ethics and honor. And so are altimeters. So he doesn't want you knowing altitude or anything like that. And yeah, it's a pretty low tech race, but in my opinion, that makes it all the more kind of cool.
You mentioned before, for one of the years that you towed the start line, you found out maybe 2 weeks beforehand. How do you prepare or in terms of your training, how do you prepare for potentially getting into the Barkley? You don't know until sort of 2 weeks out. Is your training approach just mainly just hills, up and down, trying to smash your quads up?
So I would say, sort of general recommendation for people wanting to do the Barkley. If you're serious about applying to Barkley and you're serious about going there with the goal of finishing 5 loops. So that year that I had 2 weeks notice, honestly, I didn't think I was number 20 on the wait list. I didn't think I was going to get in. And so I kind of completely forgot about the race until 2 weeks before, when I was emailed, and I was like, oh man, I got in. But if you're serious about it, you're maybe kind of sure that you'll get in, or you think even that you'll get on that wait list and you'll be, you'll be in the top 30 on the wait list. If you have any inkling of that, the I can't say sort of the application window is in the month of December often. And by the time that application window comes around, you really want to be already well into your sort of peaking condition. You already want to have sort of gone through maybe your aerobic building phase, and you want to be well on your way to good fitness by the time the end of December even rolls around. That way, you get that 3 months before from New Year's basically until the race begins, often right around April Fool's Day. And so, yeah, you really already want to be peaking. You really want anywhere from ideally like a 6 month training block going into this race. Often people find out that they get in and then try to shove what they can in a 3 month period leading up to the race, and are struck by the fact that when the race comes around, that 3 months is not enough training for what is by far one of the most difficult races on the planet.
Now, what's the cutoff time for this?
So that is one of the aspects, again, when we're talking about like, okay, why haven't more elite runners finished this? We've got so many good runners in the world. Why haven't more elites finished this thing? That is one of the aspects that I personally feel. So the navigation is one thing that throws a lot of elite ultra runners off, and then the off trail thing is another thing that throws a lot of people off who are just like, I don't want to go off trails. I'm not interested in that. Third, though, is what you just brought up, which is this idea of, okay, what is the time cutoff? So it's 60 hours, which at first you're like, okay, 60 hours. If my personal PR these days has been like 1540 or something like that, and 100 miler. So you think, okay, if I can cover 100 miles on moderately flat terrain in, under 16 hours, I should, throw some hills in there. I should be able to do that in under 60 hours, you'd think. But we just spent some time discussing, okay, there's the component of the books. There's the component of the books that are hidden in weird, vague clues. There's the fact that there's 60,000 feet of gain. There's the fact that, it takes 8 to 12 hours to actually move 20 miles. And so when you add in those factors, everybody's finish time, when we look at the course record of this race, a guy by Brett Mon, and what's it called? He was a phenomenal runner, guy who owned the John Muir Trail record for a while. A lot of records in Southern California, and just a phenomenal athlete and runner all around. But the record stands at like 52 hours. And for that to still be that high in terms of time for this race is just sort of a testament as to how difficult the thing is. And when you look at the average finish times of everyone, I finished in 57 hours and 40 minutes or something like that. And, Jared this last year was 57 or 58 something. And everyone's finishing in that like 57 to 59 hour window, is just sort of a testament as to like, it really is on that boundary between possible and impossible. And so what happens real quick with a lot of elite runners, I think, that are out there doing this, is that, we're used to being, let's say like UTMF or something like that, where the cutoff, I don't know, I think it was somewhere around 40 or 48 hours. I don't even think about that. We're out there, I'm out there gunning for like third place or something like that. And I'm aiming, my head's on the ground, and I'm just thinking about, okay, 20 hours, or whatever my time goal is. And so I'm not even thinking about the cutoff. But the thing with Barkley is that even if you're elite, even if you're the cream of the crop runner, the time is going to be on your butt the whole time, the entire race. So if you want to make the race, if you want to continue doing 5 loops, you have to make a minimum of 12 hours or under per loop. And so you might get it easier first time. You might get by on your second time. But that third loop, I guarantee you're going to come pretty close to 12 hours. And that fourth loop, you're going to come pretty close to 12 hours. And that fifth loop, you're going to be right on or a little over 12 hours. And so a lot of elites and stuff like that are just not used to being that close to a cutoff time. And that really, even if you're not an elite, and if anybody's ever experienced that, being really close to cutoff times for 12 hours, for 24 hours, for 36 hours, for 48 hours can really, really, really eat away at you mentally. And so Barkley's constantly that.
Can you share, with the loops, like in the Barkley Marathons documentary, which I'll put a link to in the show notes, you got 5 loops, and they say that one loop is anywhere between 20 to 26 miles or even further, depending on how lost you get.
Yep.
Can you tell us about the direction of the loops in terms of what direction, your competitors go?
Yeah. So typically speaking, each year he's sent them out. And so the course basically is designed in a giant circle. And so as you're doing it, you only pass one thing once. And so the race traditionally is ran in a clockwise loop, then a counterclockwise loop, and a counterclockwise loop. And then when you arrive after that fourth loop, if you're the first person to finish your fourth loop, you then get to elect whether you want to do the clockwise loop, which has 1,000 feet less gain, or the counterclockwise loop, which you've just done twice for the last 24 hours. So, it's an interesting toss-up. When I finished in 2013, I came in off the fourth loop with another guy who finished that year, Trevor, or Travis. Oh man, I'm like always screwing his name up. He's gonna hear this and hate me. Travis Wilderbor's his name. So he came off the we came in off the fourth loop together, and he ended up choosing the clockwise loop, which apparently has 1,000 feet less gain. But if you followed what I said there, the last time that you will have done that will have been your second loop. So sort of the navigating for that is kind of brand new. You will not have done that navigating for the last 24 hours versus on the third and the fourth loop, you will have done a counterclockwise loop and a counterclockwise loop. So if you choose to go the counterclockwise direction on your fifth loop, that's the exact course that you've ran for the past 24 hours. So it should be pretty ingrained in your memory at that point what you need to do to go that direction. So that was really why I personally wanted to go counterclockwise, despite the additional gain, was that I knew for a fact, okay, in 2013, I'm not going to screw up. I was way out of my mind by the time that I got to the fifth loop, way like in the depths of sleep deprivation. And I knew like, okay, going, counterclockwise on this fifth loop is going to be the thing that doesn't get me lost. I was more afraid of losing time from getting lost than I was from losing time on an extra 1,000 feet of gain, if that makes sense.
So just with the fifth loop, like if you've come in, like you're the first person to complete loop number 4. Mm-hmm. If you choose whatever direction you choose to start loop 5, whether it's clockwise or anti-clockwise,
yep.
If a subsequent runner finishes loop 4, they
yep.
then have to do the final loop in the opposite direction that you
yes.
have done?
Yeah, exactly. And that's to split up the whole thing of like, so for instance, what we saw in 2016 here, and this is pretty much to prevent like a joint finish from happening. And so what we saw, in 2016 here, both phenomenal athletes and runners, but, Jared and Gary Robbins, Jared Campbell, who went on to finish, Gary, who made it deep into the fifth loop, teamed up pretty much from the first loop, ran the first loop, second loop, third loop, and fourth loop all kind of together, helping navigate and helping get through the course. Honestly, it's a huge help to have someone there, especially through the fourth loop at night, just mentally knowing that another human being exists out there in the middle of the Tennessee woods with you. And but then then you get split up going into that fifth loop and sent different directions. And so that's basically like the ultimate test of the race is, okay, well, you could survive it with someone else, but can you make it on your own? And so that's kind of the final kick there is like, can you do it on your own? So we've seen that team up in Barkley that happened in 2000. It kind of happened in 2013 with Travis and I. We hung out we definitely helped each other through the second loop and helped each other through a bit of the fourth loop. And then there was a team up like that again in 2012 between Jared and Brett, where you saw them split in opposite directions. And then John Fegge, who was the third finisher that year, got sent in the same direction as Brett. But yeah, you've seen that team up historically happen. So that fifth loop split is there specifically to prevent people from joining forces.
In that documentary, they sort of interviewed one guy. One guy was apparently, he only covered 2 miles, but he was lost for 30 hours. Yeah.
There's been some just hilarious stories at this race of people getting lost, like right off the bat. Just, people who have I don't know, maybe you could say, they don't have much business being lost in the woods as it is anyways. But no, there's been some funny stories out there. People wandering in other people's backyards. There's been brush fires out there. There's been the first year that I was there in 2011. There was a guy. There's a prison right nearby, an active prison. So you do run under a inactive prison, but there was an active prison there, and a guy apparently got out of the prison, was just butt naked and like cracked out on meth, and like he was like running naked through the campground. As we were out on one of the loops. And so it was,
he's another competitor.
Yeah, it might have been, but yeah. Some crazy stories out there.
You wrote a good race report on the Barkley Marathons website, which I read. It was quite good, and there's a lot of humor in there. It was pretty good.
Yeah.
One of the things that sort of struck me was when you sort of did a rundown of each of the loops, and this is sort of aligns with sort of the documentary. Loop number 1, you've put starters. There were 40 starters, and then there were 21 finishers. So 50% of the people after the loop 1 had pulled out for whatever reason. Yep. And then at the end of loop 2, so loop 2, 21 starters, and there was only 5 finishers. So 75% of those who started loop 2 basically pulled the plug. And then in that documentary, it showed a lot of people after the first loop, 20, 26 miles of hell, just utterly broken and just refusing to go out again for the second loop. Was that something common that you saw, just people just utterly mentally broken and physically broken?
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like if you're a finisher and you're going for a finish, it's kind of a poisonous mindset that I hate to be like insensitive there, but that's kind of a poisonous mindset to hang around. So you don't want to hang around that too much. But if you're going to finish, then you're really focused and you're in and out of those. You're kind of in and out of your crew point unless you're sleeping. I mean that race just it broke people down, especially in 2013 when I finished. The second loop, especially, it went down to as you were saying, it went down to 5 people. And that was mainly there was just this fog that rolled in. And so it's called the Barkley fog, pretty infamous if you look at like race reports over the years. And so it's just this fog that rolls in that is just super, super thick, where you hold your hand out and you can't see your hand in front of your face. And so that was pretty much that, with like a mild rainstorm is what blew in all throughout the night of the second loop. And so that just dropped people left and right, because people went into the it was moderately warm going into that second loop, so a lot of people went into it, and you're alone for anywhere from 9 to 14 hours, whatever it takes you to cover that loop. So a lot of people went into that loop with really minimal gear and just thinking it's not going to get that cold, maybe a light rain jacket, and a lot of people ended up getting hypothermia on that second loop and dropping out because of that. So in addition to just when you can't see your hand in front of your face, navigation is absolutely like pointless.
And when you or when someone DNFs, they play a bugle, do they?
Yeah. So you get that's probably as I was saying, this race has so many little nuances and stuff, and so that's another thing is you get the song called Taps played for you when you DNF at the race, and so you go hand in your pages, you touch the yellow gate for the last time, and then you sit and you listen to your version of Taps. So I've heard it for myself personally twice, and it's a terrible song.
Yeah. Now, a lot of races normally start with like sprinting races, and at the Olympics they start with like a firing gun. How does the Barkley Marathon start?
So Laz, as I said, has been trying to kick smoking cigarettes for a while, I think, and he starts the race by it's a very silent start. So everybody's just kind of chilling around at the start and everything. The conch has gone off an hour ago, so everybody's gathered around the yellow gate with what they think is the appropriate gear for a Barkley loop, and some people wearing shorts and everything, and all eyes are on Laz, and he just kind of gets his cigarette lighter out, lights up a cigarette, and off everyone goes.
Now, I heard there's a particular, I don't know whether it's one particular part of the course or the loop. Tell us about the sawbriars.
Yeah, so those are pretty much So if you go out and, you buy your girlfriend or wife or whatever, you buy her some roses, right? And sawbriars are basically they're basically like a rose, but without the rose. It's just the sharp part of the rose plant. And so those are essentially sawbriars. They come in three different varieties. There's the sort of yellow-brown variety, which breaks pretty easy, but is the most common. There's the green variety, which has the smallest barbs, but is the strongest and will not break. So if you get one of those green ones around your thigh, what happens often is it'll catch you on the ankle, and then you'll step forward, and then the thing will like slowly travel up your whole leg and just rip your like whole leg as it travels up it until it like maybe breaks on your thigh. It might just trip you. Those green ones are really hard to break. And then the the red ones probably have some of the biggest barbs, but they break a little bit easier than the green ones.
Do your legs just get shredded?
Absolutely. There's a photo that I have. Man, I'd have to dig around for it, but from 2012 when I thought I would be cool, and you saw if you watch the Barkley documentary, in the video there, I was I wore shorts for the thing, thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go be tough, and that just shredded my legs like entirely. And your legs get they look like someone went through with razor blades and just had a heyday on you.
Yeah, geez, that'd be full on.
Yeah.
Now, just running for just under 60 hours, in 2013. What was your approach for sleep? Did you sleep at all?
So that was a big component of it. And that was, again, so it was both ego, I'd say, and sleep deprivation that really knocked me out of the race in 2012. And so strategy for sleep dep was like definitely paramount going into 2013. So developing an effective, it was after, I want to say I went the first 36 hours with no sleep, which, if people pulled all-nighters back in college, generally speaking, you can kind of get to 36 hours with no sleep. But the time that second night starts rolling around, you're really going to either want to have a sleep strategy or a strong background in sleep deprivation. And so I did, I think it was 2 45-minute naps throughout the entirety of that race. And that really helped sort of prevent one of the things that led to my DNF in 2012 was sleep deprivation. And when I was on that fourth loop, was at the top of a climb called Meth Lab Hill, and I got to the top of it and just flat out passed out in a patch of briars. I got up what I thought was instantly, and it ended up being 30 minutes later because I just completely blacked out. I didn't know who I was or where I was, and I had to pull out a map. And it wasn't until I read the map that said, Frozen Head State Park that I realized I was in Barkley. And so that was pretty bad. And so that's sleep dep. But then in 2013, I implemented the sleeping strategy. Was still pretty bad off in 2013. Still had some pretty intense hallucinations and everything on the fourth and the fifth loop. But managed to finish it off still. So
with the naps that you took, were they back at the gate, or were they sort of out somewhere randomly on the loop?
So that is something I experimented with even more in the coming years when I did Tour of Giants twice. There's what I would call a dirt nap, which is when you're out there on the trail and you take a nap on the dirt. I did a lot of, and that wasn't until 2014, I guess, when I had started doing sleep research. But basically there's the time when you need to sleep, which often you feel the most sleepy maybe when you're on the trail, but you're going to get the best quality sleep if you try to force yourself to sleep when you're back at your camp, and you can actually sleep on a bed or with a sleeping bag, you can sleep with some warmth. But if you try and take one of those dirt naps, the issue is that from the majority of what I always experienced was that, you can lay down for a 20-minute dirt nap, but then you might get up 20 minutes later and you don't feel any better after than when you laid down. Versus if you get all the way back to camp, you get some quality sleep, you're actually going to feel better or more awake when you wake up. Does that make sense there?
Now, just with the loops, let's just say it's 12 hours roughly on average. What about food and, nutrition and fluids? Do you need to take all that on your back, or is there aid stations on the loop?
There's two water points. There's 2 points throughout the course where he's laid out some bottles of water for everyone. Other than that, you're on your own in terms of nutrition and hydration and all that. But there are 2 points where there's water on the course, which I've not had any issues over the years that I've done it. You got to carry a pretty substantial size pack to get you in between those water points. But that being said, it's what's out there is sufficient in terms of water.
And how steep are some of the hills?
Man, they vary anywhere from I think the average grade there is somewhere around 35 to 40% grade, which is pretty dang steep. So you're talking anywhere from, man, they probably the longest climb there is up what's called Rat Jaw, and so that goes up Pighead Creek to Rat Jaw up to Frozen Head Tower, and that is probably a 2,500 foot climb or something around there, and you do that in a matter of about 1.5 to 2 miles. And so it's all pretty steep stuff, and that's all back to back to back. And the steepest thing there, you have the option to do it, is what's called Danger Dave's climbing wall. And so that is probably about I would say that's got to be like an 80% grade. It's pretty much just a cliff with a couple trees hanging out of it. And so
80%.
It's a cliff with some trees hanging out of it. And so that you can have the option to go down on your counterclockwise loops, or you can go up it on your clockwise loops. And it cuts it cuts maybe like a quarter mile from the loop if you dare to do that thing.
Yeah.
But
it sounds full on.
Yeah.
And what sort of hallucinations were you experiencing sort of on loops 4 and 5? Were they, when you're sort of that sleep deprived, are the hallucinations continual, or are they just random? What's it like at that, when you're that?
They're totally continual, and probably, some of the most vivid hallucinations I've had in my life. And, they're for me personally, it's going to vary from each person. And so that's probably one of the funnest things. If you go through that Barkley, if you're fascinated with this race, I do recommend going through Matt Mahoney's site and sort of clicking through anybody who's made it through the 4th or 5th loop, because what you're going to read, just skip down to the part of the race report where they're on that 4th or 5th loop, and you're going to read some really fascinating, strange stories of what's happened to people out there. But for me personally, the first really kind of vivid, gnarly hallucination that I was having was towards the end of the 4th loop. So we're talking somewhere in the realm of somewhere in the high 30s, low 40s in terms of hours into the race at that point. And I was away from Travis at the time, and it was just myself out there on the trail, and I thought I heard this like baby crying in the distance. So it was an auditory hallucination there, and I'm just hearing this baby cry in the distance down by the creek or a couple trees away. And then as I'm kind of looking around, I'm seeing all these like shadows like appear and then disappear behind a tree before I can see it fully. And then I'm hearing all the while this baby's crying, and it's getting louder and louder. And then I'm moving forward, and then I'm staring at the ground, and every single stick that I'm staring at like turns into a snake, then slithers across the trail, and then turns back into a stick, and then some of the logs turn into like a warthog or something like that, and then charge me, and then turn back into a log. And then I hear in the distance behind me, I hear Travis, the guy who I'd been running with, and he was like yelling, "Nick, help, help, help!" And then I was yelling back, trying to like see if he was okay or not, and because I thought he'd fallen. And then that was part of the hallucination.
Really?
And it was intense. That night was that one got weird. And then the hallucinations kind of continued, where it was just kind of random, inanimate objects turning into animate animals usually. And then on the 5th loop, probably my favorite hallucination that I've had in my entire life was I was going up a climb called Fikes Peak from New River. And so this is in the counterclockwise direction, one of the last climbs of the course. And as I'm going up this, in the United States, we had in the 90s all these advertisements, and this guy called the Gordon Fisherman, who was the advertising guy for fish sticks. So, little breaded pieces of cod or whatever it is. And they were like, little cheap frozen food fish sticks. You can just Google the Gordon Fisherman. And he's this fisherman with a big yellow coat. And so it was kind of raining, and I'm headed up this climb on a fire road, and I see ahead of me, it's the Gordon fisherman, and he's just walking up the climb, and I'm about, maybe 100 feet behind him, and we're just kind of walking up this climb together, and he looks back and looks at me for a little bit. I stare at him for a little bit, as clear as I can see the computer that I'm talking you through today. And so I see this guy clear and vivid, and sort of the trippy part was, I was looking down and I could see his footprints in the mud as I was going up, and I was like, this guy is like legit. And then it just came to a point in the fire road where he went straight and then I went right, because that's where the course went. And so he just went on his way and I went on my way. But to this day, I have some doubt whether was there a person in a yellow jacket wandering around just in the random woods that day, or was that a hallucination? Was that the Gordon fisherman? That was probably one of the more vivid ones.
Now, you've done so many ultras in your, I'm guessing, relatively short, you're still very young.
Yeah.
Why? What is it about pushing yourself beyond, sort of perceived mental limits, delving into that realm of suffering? What is it about, extreme endurance that you love?
Yeah. For a while, in my life, it was getting into it originally. It was something I did as sort of a media stunt for a friend. And then for a good part of my life, it was for a while a little bit of obsession with how far can I push my body? How far can I go? What's the limit of my potential or whatever? And then after Barkley, dangerously, and you see this with a lot of athletes, you see sort of their sole identity become racing. And so after Barkley, ultra running kind of turned into my sole identity, and my soul, it was what I identified as. It wasn't like, I'm Nickademus, the writer or the food blogger or the editor, whatever normal job that a person has in addition to being a runner. I was Nickademus the runner, and that's all that I was. And that was my sole identity. So going from, a time period in my life in 2013 to 2015 about where it was just oriented around living from race to race to race. And so racing was my entire identity and everything. So I was living off of that. And then recently from 2015 kind of to now, I'd say it's morphed much more in a healthier, I have a coaching business now, so online coaching for folks. And it's really now more something, one of the strange things that I thoroughly find enjoyment in doing. I like to do it to be a great display for my clients, to inspire others that, that they can go out there and do these things as well. That these tasks that, may seem monumental to some, that there are ways to do these. And I like to use races like Barkley, races like Tour de France, races like World's Toughest Mudder, to be an example of someone who's living their life to the fullest, and idealistically they're inspiring, maybe someone who's a songwriter, maybe someone who's a investor or something like that, who's maybe, on the edge of either making their big investment or not. And maybe I inspire them to, go full bore with something that ends up being a huge success for them, but they were doubting themselves. So, sort of using ultra running as a platform to inspire others is really kind of where I'm at with the sport these days, in addition to coaching.
The Tour de France in Italy. You came in 2014, you came second.
Yeah.
Is that a 200 miler?
Yeah, 205 miler. Yep.
And what's the elevation on that?
That is one of the few races, so it's longer than Barkley, but one of the few races that has more elevation gain than Barkley. So it's either 24,000 meters or 80,000 feet. So it's a lot of gain.
Is that sort of like around a particular valley, is it?
Yeah, so it's Chamonix on basically the west side of Mount Blanc, and then a little Italian town called Courmayeur is on the east side, and it starts in Courmayeur and then goes around, circumnavigates the entire Valle d'Aosta, or Aosta Valley.
That would have been picturesque. The scenery would have been incredible.
Yeah, it's hard to do that race. Well, one, you're not going to do that race too fast because of the terrain itself, but that was some of the coolest times in my life, or being up in the, Italian Alps at 2 a.m. and watching lightning storms like 2 mountain ranges away over a full moon, sipping on warm tea at the top of a 12,000-foot peak, because they helicoptered an aid station up there. That is an incredible, incredible event, and definitely like a life race. I would highly recommend to folks.
In that particular part of the world, is there, I'm guessing, because I haven't been there, I don't really know, but I'm sort of guessing that would be a big sort of ski destination. Is there like heaps of skiing there sort of in winter?
Yeah.
And if so, is there heaps of, those little sort of chalet type mountain hut things littered everywhere?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly pretty much what you're going back and forth between is a bunch of, in Italian, they're called refugios. And so, yeah, just little mountain huts that you're going in between the entire race, pretty much mountain huts in the towns that are in the valleys. And it's absolutely gorgeous and really, really cool. It's really, really cool race in terms of just how the whole community and valley comes together is probably what makes that race so unique, I'd say.
Is there much wine in the, like I'm sort of thinking, the Italians like to drink wine. Is there heaps of sort of wine you can just get into the wine into aid stations and that? Or
not so much during the event. During the event itself, a lot of sparkling water, a lot of, I recommend if you can get there a week or two before the event, sort of acclimate, one, to the weather, and two, to the Italian food, because you're going to run into a lot of like local meats and local cheeses out there. So you got to love Fontina cheese, and you got to love like mozzetta, prosciutto, and all that, because you'll come to these remote aid stations and there might just be a plate of prosciutto there, and you got to be used to digesting that, because maybe that's all there is.
Now, in addition to those races, you've done, Hurt 100 in Hawaii, Western States. In addition to these ultra marathons, you've also starting to do some OCR races and the world's toughest mudder.
Yeah, so I definitely like to dabble in anything and everything that calls itself either the world's most difficult or the most difficult event. I'm really still exploring and enjoying exploring sort of the ultra scene and doing things on my own 2 feet. But OCR, about 2-3 years ago, really started to pique my interest. Back in 2011, before the Spartan race series started up, I did this race called, at the time, just the Death Race. And then that year it was called the Spartan Death Race, just as the whole Spartan racing thing was starting to take off. And so that kind of piqued my interest in kind of this weird realm that was starting to emerge of long distance obstacle course racing, which is just basically it's kind of the same format as ultras, where you have X amount of distance that you'll cover, but then it's just scattered with ridiculous, strange tasks of, some requiring a massive amount of upper body endurance, some requiring some sort of mental aptitude. In a race like World's Toughest Mudder, it's a lot of stuff requiring kind of fear factor, like where there's some obstacles where you're going through electricity and you get jolted. There's a 35-foot cliff jump. There's, one of their races, they've had tear gas. They throw you through ice buckets. So some pretty strange stuff. But yeah, World's Toughest Mudder I did last year, and then I did in 2014. So this will be my 3rd year going back here, and hoping to maybe make it my final year, and just really want to blow this thing out of the water. And so it's a long story short here. It's a 5-mile loop course, 24-hour format. So as many 5-mile loops as you can get in 24 hours. And there's anywhere from 25 to 30 obstacles. And as I said, those range from, maybe a 35-foot cliff jump to just a pair of monkey bars to something kind of funky that you got to crawl under to getting shocked by, who knows what. Kind of thing. Crazy event though.
So does that break you in a different way than a real hilly ultra?
Muscular wise, yeah, the physiology of it's certainly different, I'd say. One of the biggest different components is, the fact of the matter in World's Toughest Mudder is that the majority of the race, because you're in and out of water obstacles so much, is you're going to be wearing a wetsuit to avoid hypothermia. Versus, you would never do Barkley or Tour of Giants or anything like that in a constricting wetsuit. And so, but when we talk about, mental breakdown or anything like that, I think a lot of the same strategies that I can bring to the table for Barkley or for Tour of Giants or for Ronda Del Sims, breaking things down into smaller pieces, compartmentalizing different aspects of the race and everything. It's sort of, certainly it's a different sport to train for, but there's a lot of parts of sort of the mental game, I'd say, that a hybrid person who does both ultras and OCR can bring to the plate.
Of all, like in your career so far, is there a particular moment that you can really recall that's been your proudest moment? Not necessarily in terms of winning, but maybe something that you've overcome that you just, you're in the pits of hell and you've managed to overcome. Is there some sort of moment that really stands out for you?
Yeah. Man, I'm trying to think back to there. There's 2 points that come to mind. One, first being that sort of fourth loop with the whole baby crying thing and Travis yelling out for me at Barkley. And it was, not that I was the thing with Barkley, is of course, if I decide, okay, I quit there. Okay, cool. Well, you still got to go back to camp. That's still 11 miles away, because there's no cell phones, there's no anything. So no matter what, okay, I quit. Okay, well, you might as well finish the loop because that's the only way you're going to get back to safety anyway. And so, I'd kind of been there. And so I was really, really proud of myself in that instance in 2013 there for making it to Sunrise and making it onto the fifth loop. So that was a huge moment for me. And then another big, big moment for me was, man, at this point, I'm trying to calculate how far in a Tour of Giants I was, somewhere in the 50, maybe the 60-hour range of Tour of Giants. So this is deep into what I guess would have been probably the third night of the race. And so one of these climbs coming out of a little town called Oyas, and I was headed up a mountain, and it was just, I was just falling apart and just falling over on the trail, stumbling, not able to stand up on my own, really, really digging into my hiking poles. And at that year specifically, they still allowed pacers, so I had a friend with me at the time. And I remember looking at him, and again, just a wicked hallucination. And it was only it was his upper body was there, but then his lower body was missing, and all his limbs and everything were hanging out. And I was just freaking out there, and just completely breaking down. And then I remember thinking to my friend who's a Navy SEAL, and sort of his quote that he's got, having been in the Navy SEALs here in the U.S., his quote's "Never show weakness." And so I just started repeating that to myself again and again. I was like, never show weakness. Don't show weakness. Come on, Nick. And just started yelling at myself to the point where I was screaming at myself and just come on, get it together. And having pulled out of that 60, 70 hours, whatever it was at the time, deep into the race, I was pretty impressed with myself getting to the finish line of Tour of Giants that year as fast as I did. So those are the 2 moments there.
Incredible. What was the time for that? The Tour de Giants?
That was 76 hours. Yeah. So that was which is pretty quick for getting those mountains.
If you could give some advice to someone who is wanting to get into Barkley, maybe 1 or 2 little tips to someone out there who's thinking next year I'm going to somehow apply and try and get into to Barkley. Get in. What sort of tips or advice would you give someone a newbie that's going to toe the start line?
Start training now immediately. If you think you're going to play with it, start training now. And definitely, elevation gain is a huge component of the race. So maybe instead of doing let's say during your peak phase of training, that maybe instead of doing something just a 90-mile week that you split over the course of 7 days, I would recommend, the peak training maybe a month out from the race itself, doing something like Friday, 30 miles with 10 or 15,000 feet of gain, then Saturday, 30 miles with 15 to 20,000 feet of gain, then Sunday, 30 miles to 20,000 feet of gain. So doing a back-to-back long run, really replicating the course and the sleep deprivation aspect of that would be really, really relevant and good to get that mental training in. Certainly practice your orienteering. And my number one piece of advice that I could give to anyone doing that race is that if you're going to spend the months invested in training for this thing, let's say you do get into the event, Whereas the entry fee is $160. If you can, I highly, highly, highly recommend trying to get like a week early off of work, getting out to Frozen Head State Park a week before the race. You are not legally allowed whatsoever, obviously, to go off the trails until the day of the race, but you are allowed legally on the public access trails there and the trail system within the state park. I highly recommend getting to that state park, hiking those public trails, getting to know the lay of the land, what the flowers look like when you're in the valleys and what the flowers look like when you're at elevation, what the rocks look like when you're in the valleys and what the rocks look like at the elevation. Get to memorize all of those weird, subtle things, because when it's pitch black, it's dark, and you're in the fog, and you're like in a valley, or you don't know whether you're in a valley or in your mountain, and you come across a plant, and you're like, oh, it's a rhododendron. Rhododendrons only grow in the valley. Therefore, I must be next to a creek. Weird stuff like that is going to make the difference between finishing or not at Barkley. So really getting familiar as familiar as possible with that land. If you're going to make that commitment, is probably my number one piece of advice.
And whereabouts can people find you online? And can you tell us about Lucky 13?
Absolutely. So Lucky 13 is my coaching business. It was named after becoming the 13th person to finish the Barkley Marathons. I was the 14th finished, but 13th finisher. So that's the origin of Lucky 13 there. And so Lucky 13 Coaching at blogspot.com is my website. And then you can find me on Facebook, either Lucky 13 Coaching or Nickademus Hollon is my Facebook tag there. And so, contact me either way through that. And Lucky 13 is online coaching. It's online gait analysis and everything as well. So if you're training for Barkley, training for Tour of Giants, training for even a marathon or anything like that, I do gait analysis and everything. So fixing up your form and efficiency and everything, and then taking that to, week-long, month-long, multi-month, multi-year long programs and everything like that to get people prepared for these crazy events. So.
Now, you said you've got the world's toughest mudder coming up. Beyond that, sort of gazing further into the future, is there any other big goals or races that you're going to do for the first time or return to? What do you sort of got in your sight, in the next in the next bit?
So sights in the next kind of so world's toughest mudder is coming up. That's in November. Honestly, that's been like on my mind for the last. Again, it's turning very similar to Barkley, where this is my third time back at it. So that's really been like that's a huge sort of blinder in front of me right now in terms of looking towards the future. But looking beyond that, there's a race down in Nicaragua called the Fuego y Agua Survival Run that I'm thinking pretty highly about going back to in March. And then they just opened up what's called a survival run. So very similar to sort of the obstacle course race format, but instead of man-made obstacles, survival run is all about natural obstacles. And so it's weird things like climbing trees or carrying weird plants or weird rocks and things like that. Really getting back to sort of a primal nature. And so they just opened one in Canada in August that I'm considering doing. And then in terms of ultras, throw my name in the hat for Hard Rock again, and see what happens. I'd love to come out for the Tarawera Ultra out in New Zealand and see the region out there. Plenty of weird FKT projects and stuff like that in my mind always, but that's kind of where I'm at for racing. So
it's been great speaking with you, and getting an insight into Barkley and one of the few humans that have finished it. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
What is it? They reckon maybe more people have stood on the moon than have finished Barkley.
I think they have. Yeah, that's absolutely crazy to think about that, huh?
But thanks again for coming on, and good luck with World's Toughest Mudder and all the other ultras coming up.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
All right, pleasure chatting with you. Have a good day.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast at borntokickarse.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes. Give a 5-star rating and a Kick Arse review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard, and catch you next time.